Let's work together to mitigate this growing threat. Ms. Criswell, I look forward to hearing more about your plans to lead this critical agency, and thank you for your willingness to serve and for being here with us today. I think as we're waiting for Senator Portman for his opening remarks, we have a virtual introduction by Senator Gillibrand. If that video is available, we could play that video.
The challenges we face as a nation are serious and ever-evolving, from the growing threats of climate change-fueled natural disasters to global diseases like COVID-19. During those crises, we rely on 20,000 women and men of FEMA to form the front lines of our response. They and the American people require competent, qualified, permanent, and Senate-confirmed leadership. Ms. Criswell is the experienced leader FEMA needs at the helm. Ms. Criswell is crisis-tested. She served in the Colorado Air National Guard for 21 years, deploying to support overseas operations in Iraq and Afghanistan, where she responded to crises in a high-stakes environment. At her day job as emergency manager for the city of Aurora, Colorado, she gained key experience at the local level. And during her tenure as a senior leader at FEMA, she led federal response and recovery operations for emergencies and disasters, including flooding in North Dakota and South Carolina, wildfires in Colorado, and tropical storms and typhoons in Florida and Guam. She also coordinated key stakeholders during the development of the national response to the Ebola outbreak. She currently serves as the Commissioner of New York City Emergency Management, where she made history as the first woman to hold that job. In that role, she has coordinated the city's responses to COVID-19, tropical storms, extreme summer heat, large fires, and power outages, including the July 2019 blackouts. As evidenced by her vision as Emergency Management Commissioner, Ms. Criswell knows that the best way to manage risk is by taking a proactive approach to reducing risk, increasing resiliency, and creating the capability to respond to new and emerging threats. She also knows from her experience as a first responder and local emergency manager that state and local leaders know their community best, and that disaster response should take a coordinated approach that supports their efforts. This forward-thinking, collaborative mindset would be an asset to all of FEMA's operations. Ms. Criswell, who, if confirmed, will be the first woman to lead the agency, is also the leader FEMA needs to tackle its internal challenges. A 2018 RAND report estimated high rates of harassment and discrimination within FEMA's ranks. At the New York City Emergency Management Commissioner, she has worked to proactively address racial and gender inequalities and encouraged employees to share their concerns. She knows that a team is only made stronger by its diversity, and that welcoming a variety of experiences and perspectives leads to better ideas. If confirmed, Ms. Criswell will bring a wealth of firsthand knowledge and experience to the role that will leave FEMA and our country better prepared to meet the challenges that lie ahead.
Ranking Member Portman, you are recognized for your opening comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to my colleague, Senator Gillibrand, for introducing Ms. Criswell. I enjoyed our conversation, and as we talked about, FEMA plays an incredibly important role always, but particularly now, not just with the natural disasters we've recently encountered, but with the work that FEMA is doing along the border as we deal with the influx of unaccompanied kids and others. You've got a lot of experience, 25 years of experience working in emergency management at the state, the local, and even the federal level. I'm glad you had that time with the National Guard in Colorado as well, because you led emergency management units while being deployed in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Qatar. So that experience is very important. The next FEMA administrator will lead more than 21,000 staff, so it's a big management job. Budget is $74 billion, and again, we've got plenty of natural disasters that need to be coordinated. The COVID-19 pandemic has made that more difficult. We just had an historic hurricane season, and then again, what's going on in the southern border, to name some of the important issues. One of the things that I want to focus on today is how every state is different, and how we need to be sure that at the FEMA leadership level, there's an understanding of that. Ohioans have been provided significant COVID support thanks to FEMA, $100 million in emergency protective measures, $1.4 billion in lost wages assistance. Just last week, FEMA launched a mass evacuation clinic in Cleveland, Ohio, to administer 6,000 doses a day, prioritizing high-risk Ohioans and underserved populations. So again, FEMA is playing a big role that some are not aware of, even with regard to COVID-19 vaccinations. The tragic attacks that we have seen at synagogues and other places of worship over the past decade, which have increased, have led FEMA to play a bigger role in what's called the Nonprofit Security Grant Program. Senator Peters and I have spent a lot of time working on this and increased the funding, but also just managed to pass an authorization for another 5 years. This is an area where, as you know from our conversation, I have a strong interest, and my hope is that this Nonprofit Security Grant Program is something that you will focus on personally to ensure that the appropriated funding continues to be there for these purposes. There's a lot of demand, sadly, right now for this, but also to be sure that the appropriated funding comes with increased responsibility for guarding against fraud or waste, or certainly use of abuse of taxpayer funds. So, Commissioner Criswell, I look forward to hearing what you will do to address these issues should you be confirmed. I appreciate your willingness to serve again at a time when our country is facing some of these unprecedented challenges, and I look forward to the discussion today regarding your thoughts on the role FEMA can play in response. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it allowing me to give the opening statement.
Thank you, Ranking Member Parman. Ms. Criswell, now it's the practice of this committee to swear in witnesses, so if you would please stand and raise your right hand. Do you swear that the testimony you will give before this committee will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
You may be seated. Ms. Criswell, you may now proceed with your opening remarks.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Peters, Ranking Member Portman, and distinguished members of this committee. I am honored to appear before you today as President Biden's nominee to be the next administrator of the Federal Emergency Management Agency. I would like to start by thanking Senator Gillibrand for her very kind introduction. It has been a true honor to serve New York City as their Commissioner for New York City Emergency Management. And I would also like to thank my family and friends for all of their support throughout this process. In particular, I would like to recognize my two sons, RJ and Eddie, who are here with me today. They have sacrificed much over the years and have supported me throughout my service to our country, and I'm very happy that they could join me here today. I believe in FEMA's mission of helping people before, during, and after disasters, particularly as we seek to bring an end to the COVID-19 pandemic. The pathway to a ready and resilient nation requires a shared vision and takes proactive mindset. We must reduce risk through system-based mitigation. We must increase the resilience of our communities so they can adapt as threats change. And we must scale our response to minimize the consequences of disasters and emergencies. I understand this is a challenging mission, and if confirmed, I welcome the opportunity to meet this challenge and lead FEMA in its efforts to create a more prepared and resilient nation. This last year has been the most challenging of my career. As New York City responded to the impacts brought on by COVID-19 global pandemic, I led a team that worked tirelessly to prevent the collapse of a healthcare system. We worked to ensure no one went hungry. We stood up a first-of-its-kind program to provide sheltering operations for vulnerable populations. And sadly, we also implemented a mass fatality operation to meet the scale and severity of the impacts of COVID-19. We had to have the ability to make decisions with imperfect information and pivot as more information became available. This is a critical skill that emergency managers across this country bring to bear every day. As FEMA responds to the COVID-19 pandemic, it must also support communities in preparing for future challenges and adapting to a changing world. The 2020 Atlantic hurricane season brought a record 30 named storms, and we also saw wildfires cause significant damage. I believe the best way to balance the competing demands is to make risk reduction investments to build more resilient communities and infrastructure, including against the threat of climate change. FEMA has developed a robust preparedness and response capability, and now we have an incredible opportunity to invest in our ability to reduce risk. As we look to the future, I believe emergency management across the nation is at a pivotal point. As an emergency manager, I have always focused on keeping families and communities safe. There is nothing more rewarding than being able to help the people of this country, and I am deeply grateful to be nominated for that important role. Finally, I understand the importance of working closely with Congress and the members of this committee to make sure FEMA is responsive to your communities and the people you represent. I have appreciated the opportunity to speak with members on both sides about the importance of emergency management, and if confirmed, commit to working in a bipartisan manner at all times. Thank you for your consideration of my nomination, and I look forward to answering any questions you may have.
Well, thank you, Ms. Criswell. Before we get started, there are three questions the committee asks of every nominee for the record. First, is there anything that you are aware of in your background that might present a conflict of interest with the duties of the office for which you have been nominated?
No.
Second, do you know of anything personal or otherwise that would in any way prevent you from fully and honorably discharging the responsibilities of the office for which you have been nominated?
No.
And lastly, do you agree without reservation to comply with any request or summons to appear and testify before any duly constituted committee of Congress if you are confirmed?
Yes.
Ms. Criswell, according to multiple studies, minority and impoverished communities feel the impact of natural disasters far more severely than others, and we've certainly seen that time and time again in my home state of Michigan. These communities often have difficulty obtaining the assistance that they need from the federal government, and therefore they don't recover as quickly as they could have otherwise, or certainly to the same level pre-disaster. So my question to you is, if confirmed, specifically what steps would you take to make sure that these communities have the same access and the same assistance as others affected by a disaster?
Chairman, thank you very much for that question. You know, it's incredibly important to make sure that we provide programs and services to communities in an equitable way. But I think, as you mentioned in your opening remarks, that a one-size-fits-all does not fit every community. And so I have seen firsthand the devastation that communities have experienced across this country. And if confirmed, I am committed to working with our leadership team, FEMA's leadership team, as well as our regional leadership to ensure that programs are delivered consistently and equitably across the nation.
Last Congress, I introduced the Achieving Racial and Ethnic Equity in Disaster Response, Recovery, and Resilience Act to establish a dedicated office to help to address the disparities that we see in disaster response, to make sure there's a focus on it, to make sure it's not occurring. Can I receive your commitment today to work together, in particular with this piece of legislation that I intend to introduce shortly here in the Congress, to help address the unacceptable gap in federal assistance?
Chairman, I have not had a chance to see your legislation, but I, again, think it's incredibly important that equity and how FEMA delivers its programs is incredibly important. And so, if confirmed, you have my commitment to work with you as this legislation gets introduced again to see how FEMA can be a part of that.
Great. Good to hear. Studies have also shown that our nation can avoid $6 in future disaster costs for every dollar that we spend on hazard mitigation today. That's a pretty good return on investment, regardless of your perspective. However, mitigation projects have historically made up only a small part of the nation's disaster spending. Communities in my home state of Michigan are facing serious challenges due to shoreline erosion and rising water levels, destroyed homes and public property, and it's even forced some residents to relocate. A bill that I authored, the Safeguarding Tomorrow Through Ongoing Risk Mitigation Act, it recently was signed into law and will allow states to to really access a revolving loan funds for mitigation projects in their states, such as protecting coastlines from further erosion. If confirmed, would you support the expansion of mitigation programs such as these revolving loan funds to help protect our local communities?
Chairman, mitigation is so critically important in today's time. As we see an increase in the number and severity of disasters, the best way for us to protect against that is to try to reduce risk. And so, if confirmed, I'm looking forward to learning more about the resources that will become available through that act and working with you and your team to see how we can make sure communities across the nation understand this new resources that might be available to them.
Well, I appreciate your understanding of the issue and your willingness to work on that issue. We've passed the authorizing language. Now we've got to get the funding and appropriations, but I can assure you local communities are looking forward to having this opportunity to invest in their communities and put in the kind of mitigation dollars necessary to protect their residents and also reduce cost in the long run. Ms. Criswell, as I'm sure you're well aware, the suite of FEMA's preparedness grants was developed following the attacks of 9/11. These grants help secure our nation's buses, trains, and ports from the threat of terrorism, among other efforts. In many ways, these grants were designed to prevent a large-scale terrorist attack on our country like we saw at 9/11. 20 years later, I think we can all agree that our threat landscape has certainly changed dramatically since that time. Our communities must now be prepared to prevent an attack from a white supremacist with an assault rifle, a ransomware attack by a criminal organization, as well as large-scale attacks by international terrorists, which continues to be something that we need to be prepared for. If confirmed, what changes would you undertake to FEMA's grant programs to better align with these modern threats that we face?
Chairman, you raise a really great point, and the preparedness grants, as you mentioned, started after September 11th, and they've done a tremendous job at increasing the capabilities and the preparedness of jurisdictions across this country. But as the risks and threats do continue to change, the grant program also must change with it. It's my understanding that Secretary Mayorkas has also asked FEMA to do an assessment of the current risk formula to make sure that we are addressing, that FEMA is addressing the current risks across the nation. And so if confirmed, I look forward to seeing where FEMA is at with that current assessment and seeing how we can always make sure that we take the opportunity to improve our programs to make a more prepared and resilient nation.
Extreme weather events such as hurricanes, floods, wildfires, they're likely to become more frequent and intense due to climate change. We're already seeing that. These events lead to a rising number of human casualties, economic losses, and there doesn't seem to be any abatement in that. In fact, we're likely to continue to see it escalate in the years ahead. So if confirmed as administrator, what would you do to ensure that the entire country, from the federal government to state and local partners, are actively considering climate change in their disaster planning?
Chairman, we are definitely seeing the increase in the impacts from climate change. As I said in my opening remarks, if we just look back last year with the most number of named storms and a record-breaking wildfire season, and the time is really now to make sure that we are making investments for this future risk and looking out 5-10 years to try to reduce that risk as much as possible. If confirmed, I really do look forward to understanding more about how jurisdictions utilize the newly implemented Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities program to continue to buy down that risk, but also to make sure that the plans that they have in place are taking into account this changing climate and that they're looking forward to the future of what those impacts might be and addressing those in their plans and their responses.
Thank you, Ms. Criswell, for your answers to my questions, and I now recognize Ranking Member Portman for your questions.
Thank you, Chairman Peters. So, Commissioner Criswell, we had a chance to talk about some of this during our conversation, but as you know, we have led efforts here in this committee to ensure that FEMA's nonprofit security grant program is effective in providing protection to synagogues, other places of worship, nonprofits. We've increased the funding. We've ensured that it doesn't just go to urban areas. Have you had much experience with the nonprofit security grant program?
Senator, I have not had personal experience with the nonprofit security grant program, but I do understand the importance of having a program like this as we continue to see more soft target attacks across our country. The nonprofit security grant program is an excellent tool to help these soft targets and these nonprofit organizations build their resilience and harden their infrastructure to be better prepared for them.
Part of the concern that I've had is sustainability and the need for local communities to work with the local police departments in coordination with FEMA, so hope you'll focus on that. Also, this notion that it's not just about money. I don't think the funding is all this is about. It's also about providing good counsel, advice, recommendations. As an example, ensuring that there's proper hardening of the facilities, that the cameras in the right place, and so on. So I hope you will work with us on that too, to make sure that this is about providing best practices and expertise, and be sure that those states and areas, rural and suburban, that are not using the program yet understand the use of the program. I assume you'd be committed to trying to do that.
Senator, absolutely. It's my understanding that the funding for that program was recently increased, and so I think it's incredibly important that outreach is done so communities do know that this resource is available to them, and then provide technical assistance so they can make the most advantage of it to help them.
Let me ask you about the southern border. We talked again a little about this. FEMA has now been called into service to support the response to the ongoing crisis that's occurring at the southern border. Although no disaster declaration has been issued, is it your understanding that the Stafford Act requires the President to first declare a disaster before public assistance can be used to care for migrants?
Senator, my understanding of FEMA's role in the southern border is providing support to HHS and CBP in the execution of their missions. I have not been briefed on their specific activities that they're performing, but through the Economy Act, federal agencies can provide support to one another as they execute their missions.
Yeah. My feeling is that, I was just down at the border, is that FEMA's role can be advisory, but the public assistance is not appropriate unless there's a disaster declaration. If migrants are arriving with COVID, which seems to be the hook for FEMA to be there, isn't the best way to address this stopping the surge rather than warehousing arriving children in close quarters?
Senator, again, I'm not familiar with the details of exactly what support FEMA is providing, but I do understand that they are providing assistance with a small footprint to assist HHS and CBP with their mission, in particular of trying to identify locations to provide the sheltering for the migrants.
We'll have an opportunity to talk about that more once we understand better what the mission is. In terms of openings for schools, I'm a big fan of reopening our schools. According to the Congressional Research Service, all 50 states have now had some schools reopen. My home state of Ohio has opened a lot of schools. Thus far, FEMA has only made reimbursements for schools reopening and operating in this year, 2021. If confirmed, would you commit to reviewing the decision to leave behind these schools that reopened back in 2020 and report back whether there will be a change in eligibility for all schools that have safely reopened under the new COVID-19 protocols?
Senator, my experience in New York City has been very similar to what you just explained, of really trying to make sure that schools are open. It's one of the first things that we can do as a nation to really move towards recovery. And the guidance that has come out of FEMA throughout this time has changed and been kind of vague at times. And so, if confirmed, I am committed to seeing where the current policy is with reopening schools and what's reimbursable, and working with you and your staff to understand better your challenges and issues.
Okay. Well, I think that's really important, again, not to leave those schools behind that, made the decision in 2020 to go ahead and continue educating our kids and did so in a safe manner. Many of the recent GAO and Inspector General reports covering FEMA highlight significant challenges in managing risks inherent in any emergency and disaster response. Specifically, GAO reports that FEMA is too focused on eligibility and compliance and too little focused on fraud prevention. As an example, the Inspector General recently reported that FEMA made more than $3 billion in improper and potentially fraudulent home repair payments since 2003. what are ways that you have mitigated the risk of fraud in your programs as commissioner in New York City? And will you commit to me that, should you be confirmed, you will prioritize fraud prevention in program design and in every response during your tenure at FEMA?
Senator, it's an incredibly important topic. With the amount of contracts and funding that's distributed during the initial phases of a disaster, it always opens up the opportunity for the potential for fraud. During my time in New York City, and in particular during our response to COVID-19, we executed more emergency contracts than we ever have. And we put in place internal controls and auditing measures to make sure that we were trying to mitigate fraud as much as we could. In fact, we even reached out to the city's Department of Investigation to engage them early on so we could help identify potential issues ahead of time and put appropriate mechanisms in place to try to prevent fraud. If confirmed, Senator, I'm certainly committed to making sure that we have the appropriate internal controls and measures in place to audit the programs while being very good stewards of the taxpayer dollar.
Well, good. I hope you work with your IG, and we certainly work closely with GO on that. We will continue to have oversight over that. By the way, the committee has oversight over a number of things, including the response to COVID, and we hope that you will be responsive to legitimate requests from the committee. We talked about that, and you said that you would be. Can you just affirm that here in the public hearing?
Yes, Senator. I commit to cooperating with any of the hearings and the investigations that you're doing.
A final thing for me is the mitigation efforts. And along the shore of Lake Erie, unfortunately, we have more erosion as waters have risen. And I believe it's cost effective. Senator Peters has the same issue, I'm sure, with Lake Michigan, and he's talked about that. But we have a real interest in providing funding up front for mitigation because we think it's more cost effective to be able to deal with the problem and prepare for it rather than try to fight erosion once it occurs. Would you commit to working with us on that?
Yes, Senator. The new, again, BRIC program, Building Resilient Infrastructure in Communities, is an excellent opportunity for us to have a transformational approach to how we prevent risk and reduce risk ahead of disasters. With the committed funding stream and the larger federal share, I think communities really have an opportunity to do widespread community-wide projects to really help address some of the things that you're talking about. So if confirmed, would really appreciate the opportunity to work with you and your staff to better understand the challenges you're facing, but as well as making sure communities understand and can take advantage of this new important resource.
Great. Look forward to working with that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Portman. Senator Hawley, you are recognized for your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Nice to see you, Ms. Criswell. I appreciated our phone conversation, and I look forward to chatting with you more here now. We discussed yesterday when we talked on the phone the historic flooding that happened in the state of Missouri, other states too in the Midwest, but in Missouri very badly in the spring of 2019. One of the things we talked about was the difficulty that many residents of my state had in applying for and receiving individual assistance, and the inconsistent rules, the lack of information for local residents on the ground. Will you work with me and members of this committee, if you're confirmed, to get rid of the bureaucratic red tape, to streamline this process, and to make sure that local residents who are in the midst of a disaster, and the worst part about this is they're not sitting at home with lots of time on their hands applying. They're out of their homes. They've lost their farms. They're in desperate need, and they have no idea where to go or what to do, and they're getting conflicting information. Well, will you work to remedy that and to streamline this process if you're confirmed?
Senator, I understand being a local emergency manager at a small jurisdiction in Colorado, as well as even in a large urban area, the complexity of FEMA programs and how burdensome they can feel, especially to individuals as they're trying to recover. And so I am committed to, if confirmed, working with you to really better understand the challenges that you're seeing there in Missouri. And, FEMA has one of their strategic goals of reducing the complexity of FEMA. And I am committed, if confirmed, to continuing that and trying to streamline processes to the best of our ability.
Great. What about the clawbacks? We talked about this as well. In Missouri, we've had the unfortunate situation that folks who waited a long time to get individual assistance were then awarded eventually individual assistance, and then a number of them were told, oops, FEMA made a mistake, and you either got too much or you didn't qualify, so we want it back. And again, when many of these people are out of their homes, they don't have, their property is literally underwater, and now they're told, oh, you've got to give back what we wrongly represented you could get. I mean, that's to say it's frustrating is a dramatic understatement. So when it comes to these clawbacks that are a result of unclear rules, unclear procedures, inconsistent application of the rules. Will you work with me and other members of the committee have confirmed on that issue to make sure that residents get timely information? Once they're awarded assistance, they keep the assistance, and they're not then told, oh, you shouldn't have gotten it after all.
As Senator, I'm committed, if confirmed, to making sure that everyone who is eligible to receive assistance gets that assistance. It's a very difficult time for homeowners and individuals as they're responding to their own disaster and trying to recover from this. And again, the programs can be hard to maneuver. So if confirmed, I'm committed to working with you and your staff to better, again, understand the challenges you're facing and ensuring that everybody who deserves assistance or is eligible for assistance gets that.
Very good. Beyond the individual assistance issue, do you have other ideas from your experience at this agency before, in New York City recently, back in Colorado, about how FEMA can improve its communications with local stakeholders and can just do a better job in terms of administering the relief, the important relief that is within the agency's purview?
Well, Senator, I think the point that you made about communicating with stakeholders is the key to helping to improve programs. And without that communication to stakeholders at the state and local level and truly understanding what their challenges are, then it's hard to make improvements in that program. And if confirmed, I believe that my experience at the local level, again, at a small jurisdiction and a large jurisdiction, will really help to inform changes and improvements that could potentially be made to the program and commit to working with you on that.
Great. Do you have any specific ideas about changes you might like to see?
Right now I would like to, if confirmed, really get an understanding and a briefing of where the programs are at. They may have changed since my time at FEMA, and then, again, working with state and locals and as well as you and your staff to understand some of the ideas that you may have.
Great, very good. I want to follow Senator Portman and ask you now about the southern border. As he mentioned, there is no disaster declaration. You talked about FEMA is able, as your understanding is, to provide advice, potentially support. However, we've been briefed that FEMA is working to set up a temporary influx care centers and have assigned at least 67 personnel to work at the border. That doesn't sound like advisory to me. I mean, that's a significant number of people, and care centers that sounds like disaster relief work. I mean, so can you give me a sense of what is FEMA doing exactly, to your knowledge, and what are you going to do to get a handle on what precisely FEMA's role is at the border right now, what seems to be a very chaotic situation?
Yes, Senator, I have not been briefed on the specifics of what FEMA is doing. I do understand from a recent testimony from Acting Administrator Fenton that they are providing some assistance at the border. If confirmed, obviously one of the very first things that I want to do is get a better understanding of the role that FEMA is playing, the assistance that they're providing, to make sure that we're supporting HHS and CBP in the execution of their missions.
Will you also, if you're confirmed, and when it comes to the border crisis, make sure that whatever FEMA is doing, it's within the bounds of the statute and the law, number one, and then also number two, make sure that we are not diverting resources as we're about to enter flood season in my state, tornado season, disaster season in many parts of the country with spring weather coming, natural disaster season, that FEMA is ready to respond to those natural disasters and what we know is going to be a difficult time, and it is not being used to gap fill at the border when frankly other agencies should be standing up and doing that work. And again, the administration's response so far is so chaotic and so uncoordinated. We have really no idea what's going on at the border. They won't allow press to cover it. They are not keeping Congress informed. So really, you don't know what's happening. Really, nobody knows what's happening. But I want to be sure that whatever FEMA is doing is lawful, and also that FEMA is ready to respond to its other core mission sets. So will you commit to working on that and ensuring that FEMA is ready to meet its core responsibilities in other parts of the country?
Absolutely, Senator. First and foremost, I will always follow the laws that direct FEMA in their activities. And second, FEMA's workforce is their most valuable resource. The women and men of FEMA do incredible work every day, and they've been responding to multiple disasters for several years now. And so I do look forward, if confirmed, to understanding the current status of FEMA's workforce, what challenges they may be having, and what improvements we need to make to ensure we're ready for this upcoming flood and hurricane season.
Great. Well, I look forward to working with you on all of that if you're confirmed. Thanks for being here today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Hawley. Senator Carper, you are recognized for your questions.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman, to a ranking member. Welcome to all of our witnesses. And I have for a long time been saying the only way to get our economy back on track and back for life to get back to normal is to put the pandemic in our nation's rear view mirror. Getting more vaccines and more arms is crucial for keeping ourselves and our communities safe. As FEMA continues to assist in the coronavirus, as FEMA continues to assist in the coronavirus vaccine rollout, how would you, if confirmed, ensure that state, tribal, territorial, and local governments have what they need from FEMA in order to continue administering vaccines? Go ahead, please.
Senator Carper, thank you very much for that question. I believe we all have
I can't hear you.
Am I on or am I off? Can you hear me now, Senator?
I still can't hear you.
My mic is on.
Yes,
Put
there
it
you
closer.
go.
Is that better?
That's. I can hear you.
Okay, great, Senator. Senator, I believe that we all have a responsibility to make sure that America gets vaccinated. The best way for us to move on to recovery is to get Americans vaccinated, and that is a shared responsibility at the federal, state, and local level. It's my understanding that FEMA is setting up community vaccine centers in various sites across the country, but they're also providing assistance in other ways. And again, there's no one size that fits all, and jurisdictions know their needs best and what type of resources they need to help execute their vaccine missions. So if confirmed, I'm committed to engaging with our state and local communities to better understand what their requirements are and working within the appropriate authorities that FEMA has to make sure they get the resources they need to get America vaccinated.
Just a follow-up, if I could. How would you seek to improve coordination and communication between FEMA and state and local governments? I say this as a recovering governor, former governor of Delaware for 8 years. But how would you seek to improve coordination and communications between FEMA and state and local governments to address each locality's specific needs during the pandemic?
Senator, coordination and collaboration is really one of the fundamental principles of effective emergency management. And if you're not doing that level of coordination and collaboration, then it's hard to provide the assistance that's needed. And, you know, it's been said often that disasters start local and end local, and it's important that we understand what the needs are of state and local communities. And, you know, from my previous time at FEMA and my work as a local emergency manager, FEMA has 10 regions that really work hard every day at trying to coordinate and understand the needs of the communities within their regions. I mean, so if confirmed, I'm committed to making sure that our regional offices as well as our headquarters staff are making sure that, you know, they're engaging with the stakeholders that they're serving, the customers that they're serving, so we can have a more prepared and resilient nation.
Ms. Criswell, my sister and I were about 10 and 11 years old when during the polio epidemic in our country. And at the time, the percentage of teenagers who were willing or interested in being vaccinated was in single digits. And one Sunday night, on the Ed Sullivan Show, a rock and roll sensation named Elvis Presley came on the stage and was vaccinated. And within a matter of weeks, the acceptance rate among our nation's teenagers was, about 80% or higher. There are a lot of people, I talked to them in Delaware and other places as well, who just said, I don't think I'm going to get this vaccine. I'm just not going to do it for one reason or the other. There have been a couple of nonprofits that stood up, one in consultation with the ad agency, to message to people who are reluctant to take the vaccination. I heard the number could be as high as a third, and that is not good, as you know. Any thoughts that you might have for helping to address and bring down that number in the weeks, months ahead, should you be confirmed?
Yes, Senator.
Aside from bringing Elvis back to life.
I don't know if I can bring Elvis back, but Senator, you raised such a concerning point, actually, right now, because we do have this goal of making sure that all Americans get vaccinated. And vaccine hesitancy is a concern, and we've experienced that in New York City. What I have discovered throughout, this vaccine rollout so far is that the best way to do that is to provide trusted messengers, and we need to have the communities that are hesitant receive information from those that they trust. That's going to be the best way to help them get beyond their concerns over whether or not they should be vaccinated. And so if confirmed, I think, FEMA has an extensive network that they rely on to help provide information out to the public. And as much as we can to continue to build that trust with those communities, I think will go a long way in helping to continue to get more Americans vaccinated.
All right. Thanks so much. Thanks for your service in so many different roles. Thanks for your willingness to take this one on as well. And our thanks to your family for sharing you with us.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Senator Carper. Senator Scott, you are recognized for your questions.
Thank you, Chairman Peters. First off, thanks for being here. First off, I want to thank FEMA. I mean, I had 4 big hurricanes. I had floods. It seems like I had every Old Testament problem when I was in my years as governor, and FEMA was always showed up, and Gracia Check was outstanding. I hope she's somebody that sticks around for a long time, because she always showed up. She would answer the questions, and she seemed like she was very fair and cared about not wasting dollars. So I didn't deal with all the other regions, but I dealt with her. Can you talk about what we talked about on the phone about this idea that it seems like it's a little bit of game of what percentage the federal government reimburses these states, and how should it work, and how does it actually work? Because I mean, somebody would say, oh yeah, you can get 100%. Some state would get over some disaster 100% reimbursement, and some other state got 75% reimbursement. Can you talk about why that is the way, and should it be that way?
Senator, the application of the public assistance program can often be complicated and confusing, and I understand that there is frustration at the local level. I've experienced it myself as a local emergency manager in what is going to be eligible and what's not eligible. If confirmed, I'm committed to making sure that the programs are implemented equitably and consistently across the nation and across all of the regions. I think oftentimes there can be opportunities for interpretation, but I think it's important that we make sure that that consistency happens, and so jurisdictions know what they can expect and really how they can maneuver and work with their local leadership, the local FEMA leadership, to help them apply for that assistance.
Thanks. My goal is just whatever's supposed to be, that one state doesn't get treated better than another state. The next issue is, and we talked about this a little bit, is that it didn't seem like there was like a toolkit that said that if you have this problem, this is what FEMA can do, and if you have this problem, it was sort of like you sat down, and Gracia Check was great. You sat down and said, okay, can I organize a program to do these things, rather than this is the program that we have, and these are your options. Does it make sense to be more have more options for people, rather than it's like almost a little bit like let's make a deal?
Well, I think, Senator, it's a great question. There's tools that I believe FEMA does have. They've increased the number of tools that I've seen on their website on, what you can and cannot expect from different programs. In fact, I've seen some tremendous tools that they've put on there for, what's eligible under the COVID-19 assistance. But I agree that, sometimes it can be confusing. But I think it's also important that we strike a balance with remaining flexible with what the Stafford Act has, so we can be creative and innovative, because no two disasters are alike. They may have different needs, and it's important to be able to use the Stafford Act as available and applicable to meet those unique needs that we might see in different disasters.
Yeah. I talked to Chairman Peters about this, I think yesterday, and we talked about this on the phone. It's the way that in my state, after Irma, we had this debris pickup, and if we had an existing contract in place and we used that, reimbursement was like $750 to $850 a cubic yard, I guess it is. But then if we use the Corps of Engineers, it was over $70, is my understanding. I mean, how can this happen? I mean, what's the process to make sure that doesn't happen? I mean, it doesn't seem fair to whoever's paying the check, and for debris pickup, the federal government pays the lion's share of that.
Yes, Senator. You know, I've worked a lot with the Army Corps of Engineers in a variety of different disasters, and they're very good at what they do, but they also come with a price tag. And I do believe that, you know, one of the ways that jurisdictions can be better prepared is by doing some pre-existing contracts ahead of time. In New York City, we've put 13 different on-call emergency contracts in place that we worked with FEMA to develop to make sure that they would be eligible. So that way we could expedite the response that we were going to have to those disasters. If confirmed, I think it would be really important to try to educate more jurisdictions on the value of this and use maybe some of New York City's or some of Florida's emergency contracts as examples of how they can be better prepared.
I didn't make any progress on this bill, but I proposed a bill. I've been up here 2 years. I think it was the first year. It basically said that you're not going to get reimbursed if you don't do that. I mean, why should we? It's not that hard to go get a contract for debris pickup, right? I mean, you just go put up bid. There's a whole process you can do. And FEMA actually has a process you're required to do anyway, right? And so why wouldn't we mandate that if they want to get reimbursed, do that so we don't sit and put ourselves in a position that after the fact, then somebody can come in and say, oh, yeah, now I'm really busy. I want a higher price. I mean, why wouldn't we do that? Why wouldn't we mandate that? Doesn't it seem to make sense?
Yeah, Senator, I believe it's really important that we do everything that we can to help communities be prepared. But again, I also think that we have to have a balance between what their own capacities are, and some jurisdictions have less capacity than others. But I do believe it's important, and if confirmed, would work to help educate and use some of FEMA's resources, such as their procurement disaster assistance teams, right, to help people understand how to better put those types of tools in place to help them.
One thing that's that surprised me up here is, and you know, the GA, inspector generals have different reports, and GAO has different reports about waste, fraud, abuse. I mean, you can call it all different things, and we saw a lot of it in the debris pickup. When you were at FEMA, do you use that stuff to try to get rid of the waste, and whether it's waste or fraud, whatever it is, to try to reduce the cost for the taxpayers? Have you found, has that been helpful at all, the Inspector General's, the GAO reports?
Senator, you know, I've read some of the Inspector General reports and GAO reports, and if confirmed, you know, I look forward to working with the leadership at FEMA to better understand their role or where they're at in implementing those. I have found, again, during my personal experience in New York City, of bringing in the Department of Investigation's city's version of the Inspector General to help issue spot and identify ways that we can put measures in place to help prevent fraud, waste, and abuse ahead of time. And so, if confirmed, committed to really looking at where we're at and what we can do to continue to improve that process.
So you guys do a good job with the problems in Florida. I mean, your teams always were there early, and I mean, and they're always very responsive. I mean, everybody wants everything done like that, but I mean, FEMA has done a good job. I worked a lot with Brock Long because that's when I had my hurricanes. But Gracia Check, I hope she sticks around because she did a great job.
Oh, I have worked many disasters with Ms. Check, and you have a great resource there.
Well, good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Scott. Ms. Criswell, as I mentioned, people are coming and going. We have a series of votes going on while this hearing. I'm going to have to leave to vote now. Senator Hassan will now preside over the hearing, and you are also recognized for your questions. So thank you, Senator Hassan.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to thank you and our ranking member, Senator Portman, for convening this hearing. I also want to thank Ms. Criswell for coming before the committee today, for the service you have already provided to this country and to your community, and for your continued interest in doing this kind of work and serving. As our country grapples with the COVID-19 pandemic, it is critical that this committee and the full Senate work quickly to confirm a FEMA administrator so that the agency has the leadership it needs to make our country more resilient to all hazards and threats, including pandemics, natural disasters, and terrorist incidents. Before I proceed to my questions, I just want to say, too, that I echo Senator Portman's sentiments about ensuring that schools may receive FEMA funds for PPE dating back to the beginning of the pandemic. This is truly a bipartisan issue, and I really look forward to working with FEMA on it. So now turning to my questions, Ms. Criswell, to put an end to this pandemic, the federal government must, in partnership with state governments, quickly and comprehensively distribute vaccines to all parts of the country. To that end, I'm pleased that FEMA has begun standing up the first of 100 federally run vaccine sites across the country, which are supported by federal personnel and additional vaccine supply. However, based on its site selection thus far, it's unclear what analysis FEMA is conducting when making decisions about site locations. Ms. Criswell, if confirmed, will you commit to ensuring that FEMA equitably considers locations in smaller states like New Hampshire for these vaccination sites supported by federal personnel and additional vaccine supply?
Senator, thank you for that question. I think one of the things that we've seen with COVID-19 is that it has truly had a disproportionate impact on our underserved populations. And as we continue to roll out the vaccine, it's incredibly important that we continue to strive to reach those communities and help them recover from the impacts of COVID-19. I know in New York City, we have taken that very seriously, and as the city has rolled out vaccine, taken a look through the Social Vulnerability Index to identify the areas that can be used or the areas that need to have vaccine sooner rather than later. And I understand FEMA has also used the same index in some of their decision making. If confirmed, I'm committed to working with the leadership team at FEMA to better understand how they're making decisions. But I also think it's really important that the engagement with state and locals is part of that conversation because they know their communities best. They know where these vaccine sites should be or the resources that they may need to support their communities. And so I'm committed to working with you and your team in this committee to better understand the needs of communities and using FEMA resources to address those.
Well, I thank you for that. I appreciate it. One of the points I want to make, though, is sometimes the federal government just makes calls on where to send resources based on sheer population. And in a small state where towns, we have 234 towns for 1.3 million people, right? So there are going to be population centers that really need the help that don't meet certain thresholds if the analysis isn't careful. So I just would urge you to look at that. I would look forward to working with you on that. And the other point I would make is sometimes what happens is state partners are doing their best in some of these places, and then at times the federal government will come in and essentially supplant but not supplement what's happening. So I think it's going to be really important to work closely with your state and local partners too to make sure that you're not undermining the efforts that are already there, which I know you would not want to do, but just sometimes it happens.
No, I understand that completely, Senator. And again, if confirmed, I'm committed to making sure that all efforts should be coordinated with the state and local partners to understand their needs and their requirements and not pushing those requirements that may not meet their current situation.
Well, thank you for that. Now I want to turn to the topic of the Strategic National Stockpile. When it comes to ensuring that the Strategic National Stockpile is adequately stocked, maintained, and pre-positioned geographically, the Department of Health and Human Services is the lead agency. However, what we've learned in the COVID-19 pandemic is that there have been deficiencies in the availability and distribution of the assets in the stockpile. Given FEMA's experience in managing and distributing supplies during natural disasters, FEMA is a partner that could provide valuable advice to improve management of the Strategic National Stockpile before the next national crisis. So will you commit to coordinating with HHS to improve management of the Strategic National Stockpile?
Yes, Senator. The Strategic National Stockpile was a great resource for New York City during the beginning of this, and we understood the limitations of it as we were starting to see cases increase. I believe FEMA's always had a great partnership with HHS, and if confirmed, I'm committed to continuing to work with them to see how we can improve that resource to make sure that we have better preparedness in place and ready for the next pandemic.
Thank you. Last question. Early in the pandemic, lack of clarity in the Stafford Act delayed FEMA from providing federal assistance and funding to states and localities to combat the COVID-19 pandemic. Toward that end, there has been some discussion in the emergency management community to clarify the definition in federal statute of emergencies eligible for federal funding and assistance. During yesterday's Emerging Threats and Spending Oversight Subcommittee hearing, which focused on preparing for future crises, we heard testimony from General Votel and other members of the Business Executives for National Security Commission on the National Response Enterprise, and they were advocating for updating the Stafford Act. Ms. Criswell, do you support updating Stafford Act emergencies or disasters to include pandemics or major cyber attacks?
Senator, FEMA is an all-hazards agency, and they continue to respond to hazards, whether it's a pandemic or a natural hazard or man-made events. I would welcome the opportunity, if confirmed, to working with Congress to see what authorities could help us do our job better so we can, again, make a more prepared and resilient nation and help people.
Thank you for that. I would look forward to that too. It's both the type of disaster and the extent of disasters that we have to be prepared for, I think, and realize that some of the situations on the ground are changing. So I look forward to working with you very much. Now I can turn to Senator Ossoff, who is ready to take his round of questions next.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate that. And thank you, Ms. Criswell. I enjoyed the conversation that we had discussing some of the most urgent concerns in Georgia when it comes to emergency management. And I just, in the interest of everybody's time, have one question for you, which is, Ms. Criswell, will you commit that in your first year in this position, should you be confirmed, that you will join me in Georgia to meet with the farmers who were impacted by Hurricane Michael and to engage in planning with local leaders and local officials to ensure that we have the plans in place to get swifter aid to Georgia's agricultural sector if and when another devastating tropical storm or hurricane strikes our state? Thank you.
Senator, thank you. I appreciated the conversation that we did have about the variety of challenges that Georgia faces, and if confirmed, I would welcome the opportunity to come meet with you and your staff and better understand the challenges that you're facing across the variety of communities that you serve.
Well, thank you, Ms. Criswell. I look forward to welcoming you to Georgia, and Madam Chair, I yield back. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Senator Ossoff. So we have a couple of other members of the committee who are trying to make it back from other committee hearings and votes because they would like to touch base with you. So while we see if those logistics work, why don't I ask you this? You have been through over the last year of this pandemic this critical frontline role in New York City. You have been talking with a number of senators as you prepare for this nomination hearing and for taking on the work if you're confirmed. Are there things we haven't touched on yet that you would like to bring up to the committee or just update us on?
Senator, I appreciate that opportunity. New York City was really at the epicenter of the COVID-19 response in the very beginning. And I think it's important to understand that, as we were going through that response in March and April, before it started to improve in May, is that, we were responding to the situation when we didn't know how bad was going to get.
Right.
And making decisions literally at times of, each day, do I have enough staff? Do I have enough people? Do I have enough resources to get through the next 72 hours? And so, as we've discussed with the Strategic National Stockpile and other preparedness efforts, I think that we have such a great opportunity right now to learn so many lessons of the beginning days of this pandemic and how we can invest in preparedness going forward. I think, the nation did a great job of investing in preparedness for terrorist attacks after 9/11, and I think we have another really great opportunity to invest in preparedness against a future pandemic.
Yeah. As the pandemic evolved in New York City and as you had to make decisions on the ground in real time, thinking back to that experience now, are there ways of using technology now that you would like FEMA to work on that would allow you to be more nimble in the field?
I think, Senator, technology is an incredibly important tool for us to use. And I think what I would say, what we've learned from the pandemic and the ability to do more of the work remotely, I think that there's also a really great opportunity right now to continue some of those lessons learned on how we can use technology to be more efficient in our support to state and local communities. And if confirmed, I really want to look at, some of the benefits that happen and how we can institutionalize those going forward. So, one, we have more efficient deployment of resources, and we're serving communities better.
Well, thank you for that. I appreciate it very much. I now see that Senator Lankford has joined us, and I will turn to Senator Lankford for his round of questions.
Thank you. It's good to get a chance to visit with you again. Thank you. Thanks for the time we could already spend before to be able to talk through several of these issues, and I appreciate making yourself available to be able to go through those. Let me talk through a couple of things we had talked about before and some additional things to be able to talk about. My state, we're overachievers with FEMA. We get frequent flyer points because we have tornadoes, we have floods, we have wildfires. We're not a hurricane state in the sense that you're going to hit a major urban area. It's hitting a lot of rural areas, and so there's some different dynamics there. But I want to zero in on a couple of things. One is the flooding issue, and specifically the issue of hazard mitigation. We have areas that are repetitive flood areas, and they would do buyouts, except the process on a buyout takes 12 to 18 months at least. And even when my state wants to be able to partner with the Community Development Block Grant disaster relief funds and to be able to also partner out with some of the buyouts, the timelines are different on it. And so to be able to figure out how to be able to pull that together makes it incredibly challenging. So what I'm looking for is not what's been done in the past. How do we fix an issue where we have a neighborhood that's going to be flooded out, that's obvious we should buy out this whole neighborhood, but we tell people, well, we'll talk to you about buying this neighborhood out in 18 months. So basically live in a hotel for 18 months till we figure out what we're going to do. Does not work. How do we fix that?
Senator, thank you very much for that question. I have seen firsthand the devastation that flooding provides, it does to communities across this country. And the slow recovery initially as floodwaters are trying to recede just even delays some of those response efforts initially. And as you and I discussed, even in New York City, we're still having conversations about how to do buyouts from the experiences from Hurricane Sandy. So I understand that the programs are complicated, they're cumbersome, and difficult to maneuver in the frustrations that people feel. If confirmed, I'm committed to really having a hard conversation with our mitigation team and understanding how we can continue to reduce the complexity of those programs and really help communities reduce their risk earlier, ahead of disasters, but more potentially, how we can assist afterwards as needed.
Right. And we'll get to the earlier part in just a moment, but the issue still comes back to at the moment of disaster when people are having to make a life decision, am I going to rebuild or am I going to try to move to somewhere else? If you tell them, I'll answer your question in 18 months, that does not work. And for the local community that's there that knows 25 years from now or so, this is going to flood again, so let's buy it out and figure out how to do this different. And people would say, well, you can't yet. You have to wait 18 months before we can make that decision. It doesn't work for them. So it's just frustrating for everyone. And it's definitely damaging for the taxpayer because we end up paying for the same thing over and over again because we weren't able to make the decision the previous time. The preparation side is significant. There's some counties that have not gone through the process of preparation and all the filings for the National Flood Insurance Program. There are lots of reasons why on that, but typically in rural counties especially, it's just personnel and paperwork and processing. So individuals within that county can't get flood insurance because they're in a very rural county that just doesn't have the structure to be able to take care of that. How can we help those counties and those individuals to be able to finish out the process in preparation for them and so that those individuals can get flood insurance?
Yes, Senator. Hazard mitigation plans are a really valuable and important tool for communities to have, one, not to just help better understand their risk, but also to make them eligible for flood insurance. And I do understand that it's hard to develop those plans, that it takes a lot of time and effort. I do believe that there are programs that FEMA administers that will help with technical assistance and the ability for them to develop those plans. And if confirmed, I'm committed to, I would love to work with you and your team to better understand the communities within your area that are having difficulty and what we can do to better assist them to get those plans done. Because it not only helps individuals get flood insurance, but it helps jurisdictions better understand their risks so they can take the appropriate measures.
Right. So in a rural state like mine, we have some unique challenges. We'll have a wildfire in the northwest of our state, as we did several years ago. We literally had a wildfire larger than the state of Rhode Island. Folks in the Northeast didn't even notice it, though, because it's not going to be on national news, but it was very significant to us. A lot of cattle were lost. A lot of grazing land was lost. A lot of fence line was lost. Thankfully, firefighters in all those areas worked hard to be able to protect homes, but we had a tremendous amount of loss. At the end of it, on the whole, FEMA would say not enough homes were damaged, so you can't get help. So a wildfire the size of the state of Rhode Island does not count as a FEMA disaster because it's in a rural area, though there's a lot of loss there. So we start working through the complexity. What's USDA? What's an FSA piece? What's going to be FEMA issues? What's community development block grant DRs? And you start working through all the complexity of that. So two big questions that I've got for you. How do we deal with this urban-rural challenge, which is getting harder based on the redefinition of the size of a disaster and the amount for a disaster? How do we deal with that complexity? And how do we deal with the complexity of how many different agencies are involved in disaster relief, how many different deadlines, how many different forms, and for a county or for a state, you better be an expert, and you've been on the other side of this. You better be an expert to be able to figure out how to be able to navigate all this. How do we help people navigate it and all the issues, and how do we help determine what we're going to do on rural versus urban in assistance?
Thank you, Senator. To your first point, I understand. I mean, even in my state of New York, with the large urban area of New York City really has an impact on the ability of smaller jurisdictions within New York State to get assistance. And I talked about the need to have equity in how we deliver programs. And so I think that there is an opportunity for us to really take a look at how those decisions are made and the factors that are used so we can take jurisdictions' needs into consideration. And so if confirmed, I'm committed to working with you to better understand potential ways to improve that analysis and better serve all communities so they can get the assistance that they're eligible for. On the second part, you're right. There are many different programs that are out there that provide assistance, and that's a good thing, right? We want to have different options for different communities because, again, no two hazards are alike and jurisdictions have different needs. I do remember FEMA had a program called a Federal Disaster Recovery Coordinator, and one of their roles was to help bring all of those different programs to bear in a community that was recovering from a disaster and help jurisdictions navigate those different resources. If confirmed, I'm committed to seeing where the status is of that program and how we can better support jurisdictions as they're trying to maneuver through the variety of different bureaucratic programs that are out there and make it easier for them to get the assistance they need.
Thank you. Madam Chair, may I ask one additional question?
Yes, you may.
Let me ask this additional question just on keeping the rules consistent. And if anything changed last year, it was everything. So we understand that full well. FEMA was very engaged in what was happening with the pandemic relief. But we experienced some things with FEMA last year that are consistent with FEMA before. That is the rules changing midway through. So let me just give you an example of what I mean by this. When protective equipment, PPE, was coming out to local law enforcement, it was have PPE, we know that you need it. And then a few months it was, no, actually the PPE can only be used if you're actually dealing with a COVID case. So you need to document each location to make sure that it was actually used in a COVID case location. Well, it's a bureaucratic nightmare for them to be able to do that. And obviously, we can't test every person to know when we walk up. So everyone had to assume everyone they interacted with, especially in the earliest days, was COVID positive because you didn't know, and we didn't have enough testing capability in the earliest days. But the change in rules midstream drove everybody crazy on this. You can't answer this question for the days ahead, but I want to make you aware that if you're an emergency manager in any state, It's hard enough to be able to manage the emergency. It's harder to be able to manage the rule changes midstream during an emergency and how we're going to respond back to FEMA, deadline changes, rule changes, what you need to keep. You need to have a picture of this pre-emergency. You need to have, all this documentation. Would you be willing to be able to work with us to be able to make sure we have one set of rules that goes out, and if there's going to be a change, there's enough time retroactively to be able to deal with this and it doesn't create the bureaucracy for local governments?
Yes, Senator. I experienced that in New York City as we were trying to manage the response to COVID-19 through March and April, and at the same time really trying to understand the rules that were coming out from FEMA. And I understand the frustration. We experienced that frustration in our own response. And so if confirmed, I'm committed to working with you and would welcome the opportunity to work with you and your team, to better understand ways that could potentially be improved and information could be delivered more timely and more consistently.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you as well.
Thank you, Senator Lankford. Now we'll move to Senator Sinema, who will be joining us virtually.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Ms. Criswell, as Arizona's senior senator and chair of the Subcommittee on Government Operations and Border Management, it's important that I closely examine the management and effectiveness of federal programs. You are entering FEMA during a time of crisis. In addition to the natural disasters that FEMA is accustomed to handling, you will also need to balance those priorities with the continued impacts of the coronavirus and a growing crisis with migrants and unaccompanied minors at our southwest border. So given the significant increase in the number of families and unaccompanied minors coming to our border, there's a critical need in my state of Arizona for federal resources and personnel to manage the challenge, protect our communities, and ensure that migrants are treated fairly and humanely. The American Rescue Plan included funds through the Emergency Food and Shelter Program for NGOs and local communities to provide assistance to migrants. If confirmed, will you ensure that FEMA works with the EFSP National Board to get these funds allocated efficiently and fairly, ensuring that the program is as flexible as possible to respond to NGO needs, including providing advance funds where appropriate?
Senator, thank you for the question. Yes, if confirmed, I'm committed to better understanding the current status of FEMA support through the EFSP program and welcome the opportunity to work with you and your staff to understand some of the challenges you're facing and what might be done to improve them.
Thank you. Secretary Mayorkas recently tasked FEMA with stepping in to help manage the challenge of unaccompanied children arriving at the border. This was a good decision, and I believe that FEMA's vast experience in disaster management can help manage other aspects of the crisis as well. What further actions do you believe FEMA can take to assist with the ongoing migration challenges at the border? And will you continue to work with my office to explore opportunities to make sure that our nation is better prepared moving forward?
Senator, FEMA is an all-hazards agency, and they are one part of the team. They have continued to provide support to other federal partners, and as in this case, providing support right now to HHS and CBP in the execution of their mission. I have not been briefed on the specific activities of what FEMA is doing, but if confirmed, I look forward to getting a better understanding of FEMA's current role, and I would appreciate the opportunity to work with you and your team to see what we can do to better assist.
Earlier in this hearing, Senator Hassan brought up the hearing that she held as the chair of the Subcommittee on Emerging Threats and Spending Oversight, and the recommendation that the Stafford Act be expanded to include pandemics and cyber events. I believe that any such debate should include humanitarian crises, such as the migrant crisis we are facing in Arizona and along our border. What guardrails would you recommend be placed on any Stafford Act expansion to ensure that our nation responds effectively and efficiently to emergencies while not overburdening FEMA's response capabilities?
Senator, FEMA is an all-hazards agency, and they have provided support to humanitarian missions in other parts of the country and the world as well. And if confirmed, I would appreciate the opportunity to work with Congress to see what authorities could potentially be given to FEMA to help them with their current mission.
During our conversation last week, we discussed the Urban Area Security Initiative and the preparedness grants that are offered through FEMA's Grants Directorate. During our conversation, you noted that Secretary Mayorkas' interest in reviewing the entire suite of preparedness grants to ensure that the United States is utilizing these programs wisely and to make sure that we're increasing resiliency and not simply maintaining the status quo. You also noted the need for stakeholder engagement as part of any review. So I would urge you to make sure that communities such as Phoenix that utilize these programs are brought to the table early and often to make sure that FEMA knows what works and what doesn't work on the ground, and to identify opportunities to increase the relevance of the data utilized in determining relative risk.
Senator, yes, as we discussed, Secretary Mayorkas, it's my understanding, has asked for a review of the risk formula being used for grant programs. And if confirmed, I look forward to better understanding the current status of that review. But again, as we discussed, I think it's critically important that any part of a formal review like that should have stakeholder engagement, because those are the customers, and we need to understand their challenges and their needs so the programs can be more effectively delivered.
On another topic, almost all of Arizona is experiencing severe drought. And this week, the state reported that it expects fire season this year will be just as bad as what we experienced in 2020. Now, last year, 2,500 fires in Arizona burned 980,000 acres of land. And worst of all, fire, tornado, and hurricane seasons all overlap in our country. So when this is layered over our response to a pandemic that has claimed over 16,800 lives in Arizona, plus a humanitarian crisis at our border, it's a lot to handle. So if confirmed, how do you plan to utilize the resources at FEMA's disposal to provide prompt and effective support for each of these crises while still maintaining sufficient readiness for additional disasters that could occur?
Senator, it's a really great point. And FEMA has consistently across the years responded to multiple missions at the same time. If confirmed, I currently do not understand the current challenges that the workforce is facing, but it is a priority of mine to make sure that the workforce is ready for this upcoming hurricane season and the multiple missions it's currently supporting.
Thank you. Madam Chairman, I yield back, and I thank our our nominee for being with us today.
Thank you, Senator Sinema.
Oh, Mr. Chair, I apologize.
No, that's all right. That's all right. Senator Padilla, you are now recognized for your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Assume you guys can see and hear me okay. I want to begin by just echoing and associating my comments, myself with the comments by Senator Sinema vis-a-vis the role of FEMA in helping address the situation at the border at this point in time. So trust that we'll be in touch with the agency if there's additional resources or anything else needed to continue to make progress there. But my main questions that I wanted to raise are inspired, as Senator Sinema just acknowledged, for Arizona by recent wildfire seasons in the state of California, the recent wildfire season being the worst on record. In 2020, the state experienced 10,000 fire incidents, more than 4.2 million acres of land burned, and more than 10,000 structures damaged or destroyed. FEMA, specifically Region 9, has been an excellent and consistent partner with California, not just state government, but counties as well, to weather repeated unprecedented disasters year after year. And in between what seems to be like an expanding fire season, we want to take advantage of this time period to look for increased funding, support, and understanding of the unprecedented times that we're living in. After another dry winter, California is entering drought conditions once again and expecting another extreme fire season. So, Ms. Criswell, how can we ensure that FEMA is not just responsive to wildfires during and after an event, but also more active in the off-season in working with state and local governments, as well as other federal agencies to support mitigation efforts to reduce either the chance of devastating fires or the level of devastation from fires that do occur?
Thank you very much for that question, Senator. You know, as we've seen, the number and severity of disasters continues to increase year after year, and the record-breaking wildfire season that we had last year was another example of why it's so important right now for us to be able to invest in pre-disaster mitigation. I do believe that the Building Resilient Infrastructures and Communities grant that was released last year is an excellent tool for communities to now really have transformational progress at reducing risk across their communities. But it's often my experience that the technical assistance that's provided is only provided when the notice of funding opportunity is released. And I think we have a real opportunity to make sure that we're doing outreach and engagement year-round on a continual basis so jurisdictions can better plan and prepare for these events that are going to happen not just next year, but 5 years from now or 10 years from now. And it takes a lot of work to put in the planning and scoping steps of these programs. And so by providing outreach and assistance year-round, I think that communities can build better projects, so when the funding opportunities are released, they can have better projects to put in requests for. And so if confirmed, I am committed to this outreach and engagement. I think the time is now for us to really take a very proactive and deliberate approach to how we're reducing risk and using all the tools that we have available to do that.
Thank you. And I think the same spirit can be expressed in a very similar question vis-a-vis earthquakes. Much less frequent, but more devastating, and it's only a matter of time before California experiences the next big one. And I'll assume that the spirit of your response would also apply for other categories of natural disasters. I have another follow-up question. I know Senator Sinema also mentioned or made reference to the Stafford Act, which governs FEMA's disaster efforts, which has not been explicitly inclusive of wildfires. And due to the unique nature of wildfires, California communities have too often experienced difficulty after recent catastrophic wildfires in accessing disaster assistance due to eligibility language, home insurance, and relocation assistance. So if confirmed, will you commit to working with my office to ensure the needs of wildfire recovery and mitigation are fully supported by FEMA?
Yes, Senator. I believe that we have opportunity right now to really look at what the authorities are within the Stafford Act, and I would appreciate the opportunity to work with you and your team and Congress to see if additional authorities can be given that FEMA has the ability to address the current risk and threat environment.
Okay, thank you. And just one last comment, not necessarily a question for a lengthy response, but an acknowledgement that FEMA's been working alongside the CDC and other federal agencies in coordination with state and local and tribal and territorial authorities and private sector partners to ramp up and improve vaccine distribution. Partnerships have been critical in combating the COVID-19 pandemic, including in multiple mass vaccination sites in California. But I understand some of these contracts formalizing the partnerships are due to expire in the coming weeks. So hope, if you're confirmed and to the extent appropriate prior to your confirmation, we can count on your help in extending these agreements to continue the improved success of the vaccination strategies.
Senator, yes, I think, again, we all have a role to play in getting America vaccinated. It's one of the most important things we can do right now to move on to recovery from this COVID-19 global pandemic. And so if confirmed, I'm committed to working with you and your team to understand the needs that California is facing so we can get the resources needed to help get America vaccinated.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Padilla. Senator Rosen, you are now recognized for your questions.
Thank you, Chairman Peters, Ranking Member Portman, and thank you, Commissioner Criswell, for your willingness to serve. FEMA is an extremely important organization to every state here in our nation. And I'd like to Thank you for talking with me yesterday about the Urban Area Security Initiative, or is known as the UASI grants. It's a vital program that protects our people of Las Vegas, our critical infrastructure, and really our tourism-based economy. As we discussed, the city of Las Vegas depends on UASI funds as it builds the infrastructure it needs to defend residents and visitors against terrorism. UASI needs reforms in order to ensure that densely populated tourist destinations like Las Vegas have predictability and stability in funding over a period of years so it can make long-term security plans. In 2018, the Nevada congressional delegation urged FEMA to incorporate visitor and special event data into the risk assessment profile to determine how much funding each urban area receives. So you mentioned during our conversation, you believe Secretary Mayorkas will be taking a look at the UASI program, including the funding formula. So can you commit to working with us and using any authority and influence you have to ensure that grantees and other stakeholders can participate fully and meaningfully in this process?
Yes, Senator. If confirmed, I look forward to seeing the current status of the assessment of the risk formula that's currently underway. And the only way to be successful with that is to make sure that we're engaging the stakeholders that are receiving this assistance. And so if confirmed, I would welcome the opportunity to work with you and your staff to better understand your needs and your ideas about how this could be improved.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm going to move on to some other issues we have in Nevada. Of course, wildfires and the Fire Management Assistant Grants, or FMAGs. Last year's wildfire season, unfortunately, was one of the worst in our history. It burned more than 10 million acres across the country, devastating communities. FEMA, of course, has several programs to assist communities both before and after the fire, in particular fire management assistance grants programs. They've been vital for our communities as they recover and rebuild. However, I've heard from a lot of my constituents that the current criteria for FMAG is just too restrictive for our rural communities. These areas are smaller in population, but they rely heavily on the land for income through mining, through ranching, outdoor recreation, and without assistance from FEMA, it's much harder for these communities to quickly respond and recover from a wildfire. So again, will you consider working with me to change the FMAG formula to make it more accessible, more nimble for our rural communities that really need this in the time of devastation? And also talk about what other resources or ways that you might assist our remote and rural communities in dealing with emergencies such as wildfires.
Thank you, Senator. If confirmed, I look forward to better understanding more about the FMAG criteria and the formula that's used. And I would welcome the opportunity to meet with you and your staff to understand how it has impacted, helped, and the challenges that you face with the use of the FMAG grant to help you. So if confirmed, would love that opportunity to work with you. And as far as helping communities help prepare against future wildfire, again, I believe we really have an opportunity right now to take advantage of some of the new resources that are out there, such as the Building Resilient Infrastructures and Communities Grant, to help communities use this to reduce the risk within their neighborhoods, especially as we continue to see the number and severity of disasters rise year after year.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'd like to move on to unfortunately, we have a rise in domestic terrorism in our country, and we have a program, our nonprofit security grant program, that's really important to folks. So over the past few years, like I said, we've seen a dangerous rise in threats and attacks on at-risk communities, including the deadliest attack on the American Jewish community in modern history at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh. And so we want to protect houses of worship and other nonprofits against terrorist attacks and targeted violence. So FEMA's nonprofit security grant program, it makes grants to eligible nonprofit organizations for target hardening and other security enhancements. And so we know that the threats are growing to these institutions, and the demand for grant money has far outpaced their availability in recent years. And so yet in fiscal year 2021 DHS budget, they have failed to request a specific funding amount for the nonprofit security grant program. Fortunately, we've doubled it to $180 million, but if confirmed, Ms. Criswell, will you advocate for future requests funding requests to include specific allocation for nonprofit security grants for that program so that the allocation meets the growing needs of the communities as domestic terror threats continue to rise.
Senator, we are continuing to see increased threats to soft targets, and they're becoming an increasing concern. And I believe that this grant is a great opportunity to help reach out to those communities and those nonprofits to help them improve their preparedness and their resilience. I'm not familiar with the funding authorities in the past, but I appreciate Congress's support in getting it funded, and I understand that funding this year was even increased. And so I think it's incredibly important that we continue to do outreach and engagement with the nonprofit community in the houses of worship so they understand that this resource is available and how they can use it so we can continue to help them build their own resilience for the future.
Thank you. And the houses of worship and the nonprofits, oftentimes they have small staff, and they're not, some of these grants, they're quite difficult, and they require some technical assistance in order to be able to fill them out adequately and receive the information. And so do you have plans, or can you talk to some plans that you might consider to increase FEMA's outreach to these smaller nonprofits, houses of worship with limited staff and resources to be able to compete and get these grants to improve their security and safety?
Senator, if confirmed, I look forward to seeing the current strategies that FEMA has in place for how they're currently engaging and doing outreach and working with them to see if there's ways that we can improve that outreach and identify maybe some of the gaps that we might see across the nation of areas that we think could potentially utilize this but haven't taken advantage of this. And so if confirmed, I'm committed to working with them to engage with more communities. I think it's incredibly important that we do outreach so they understand that this resource is available, but that we also provide the technical assistance because the grant programs are complex and they're cumbersome and very hard to apply for at times. And not all communities have the same level of resources to do that. And so I believe technical assistance is an important part of this entire process.
Thank you. I appreciate that because we try to fund as many grants as we can. FEMA is an important part of much of our community response in a lot of these disasters, and having that technical assistance is very important. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, thank you, Senator Rose and Ms. Criswell. You're coming to the end here of this hearing. That was the last set of questions, but before I close out the hearing, I just want to pick up on the point Senator Rosen made about the complexity of these grants. The preparedness grants, they're so important, and the entities that need them the most and are impacted the most are the ones that don't have the resources to actually put together the paperwork. So it's not, house worship is clearly a key area, but it's all across the board, smaller communities, et cetera. So I hear you're confirmed to doing it. You have to do a deep dive. It doesn't do any good for us to have these grants if the folks who need it the most simply are unable to jump over all of the hurdles that you have to jump over to get them. So I look forward, and you can reiterate that you're going to be focused on that because I think it's critically important.
No, Senator, absolutely. I think, those that have the resources take advantage of these grants all the time, and the grants have done a great job of increasing the capabilities and preparedness across the nation. But I am committed, if confirmed, to making sure that jurisdictions across the country get the assistance they need to take advantage of these resources. We have a shared responsibility to improve the resilience and the readiness of the nation, and the grants are one way to do that.
Well, thank you, Ms. Criswell. Thank you for your willingness to serve in this capacity. As I said in my opening remarks, and it's clear from all of the questions you had, this is an incredibly difficult job. It's incredibly complex, but also of vital importance to our country. So thank you for your willingness to serve. And if confirmed, this committee is actively involved with FEMA issues, and we will want to partner with you very closely to make sure that you're successful in your job, if confirmed. Your success means a success for the country, and we will be part of that. So with that, I will state for the record, Ms. Criswell has made financial disclosures and provided responses to biographical and pre-hearing questions submitted by this committee. Without objection, this information will be made part of the hearing record with the exception of financial data, which are on file and available for public inspection in the committee office. The hearing will remain open until 12 p.m. tomorrow, March 26, for the submission of statements and questions for the record. And with that, this hearing is now adjourned.